what is today's sports betting and how is the teenage brain uniquely vulnerable? These are some of the questions we hope to answer in a new prevention short from Prevention Ed, a global substance use prevention organization looking to help prevent young people from developing addictions in the first place. So, what do I mean when I say sports betting? This refers to betting money on any unpredictable outcome, whether that's of the sports game or within the sports game itself. For example, what's going to be the score at the end of the first half, who's going to score a three-pointer, etc. These are common same-game parlays that young people bet on today. And people are betting mostly on apps on smartphones and computers that are heavily gamified to trigger those maximum dopamine releases, etc. And there's a dangerous misconception about sports betting in particular, with this idea that it's somehow skill-based, that because someone is really into sports, it's their hobby, they know a lot, they know the players, that they're somehow at an advantage. But we take the time to break this down about how these apps have really advanced artificial intelligence algorithms working overtime to make sure that the house always wins and that the payout of a bet is going to be proportional to its likelihood of hitting. And they also have full-time statisticians to help them achieve that goal. And the reason sports betting is the thing is because all of these outcomes are inherently unpredictable, regardless of how much someone knows about sports, etc. Nowadays, parlays are more common. They really take advantage of a young person's risk versus reward perception. A parlay bet meaning combining multiple bets into one, wagering a bet on multiple unpredictable outcomes. This is going to attract users with a really high payout, but the reality is that bet has a very low chance of hitting. And these apps make most of their revenue in some markets from parlay bets. So why is sports betting so addictive, and why is this substance use prevention organization taking the time to discuss it? The reality is that gambling and sports betting release chemicals in the brain in a strikingly similar way to recreational drugs, including alcohol. And it's this anticipation of winning, of having the bet placed, that triggers the most brain activity. It's not an addiction to winning, it's an addiction to the behavior of placing bets, making wagers, engaging in sports betting. This excitement comes from the chase, not the. And that's something that's critical to understand when we look at this as a behavioral addiction. And when I say addiction, I'm of course using the World Health Organization definition, which is an individual's repetitive, compulsive use of a substance or behavior despite negative consequences to self or others. This framing of a behavioral addiction and breaking down this definition is really important because often when we think of negative consequences associated with a sports betting addiction or a gambling addiction, the first thing people think of is financial consequences. But the list is so much longer. Sometimes the financial consequences are not the most significant. Someone could have anger issues. Gambling is associated with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, which we'll talk about in a moment. So it's important to expand this conversation about risk and consequences far beyond financial. And teenagers are uniquely vulnerable because of their developing brain. The last part of the brain to develop is that prefrontal cortex, responsible for weighing risk versus reward decision, which is exactly what sports betting apps prey upon. The teenage brain we talk about as having a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes, meaning this reward system is developed and it's an overdrive, and the brakes that help us exercise restraint in certain behaviors are underdeveloped, that prefrontal cortex, and that's what makes teenagers more vulnerable to addictions. These apps are designed in nefarious ways to ping people at the right moments. They study the individual's use of the app and use that data to tailor their marketing and promotions. And of course, especially with the developing brain, but with any behavior, we see that tolerance builds with repetition, and people need more and more of the behavior, both in terms of quantity of time and also placing larger wagers to achieve that desired effect. We're in a period of historically unregulated advertising of gambling, and part of that has to do with social media. Lots of celebrities and influencers are paid to promote bets that they really have nothing to do with, or they're paid to live stream themselves gambling. They're given money to gamble with by the online casino. And so there are no personal financial risks, and they give a one-sided picture of the excitement of gambling and get people hooked. Companies also trying to manipulate that risk versus reward assessment with deals like bet $5 and get $200 instantly. And what they don't tell you is that you have to bet that $200. You can't cash it out, and you have to bet it 5 or 6 different bets. And what they're doing is trying to get you engaged in that behavior at least 6 times, let's say. And they're wagering that getting a user, or a young person especially, to engage in that behavior 6 times is enough to get them hooked. As mentioned, gambling addictions can lead to very severe mental health symptoms. Sometimes gambling addictions are referred to as the silent addiction because it's a behavior, and nowadays especially it's a behavior that's very hidden within the phone. People's addictions can progress to a much more severe point without anyone noticing, as opposed to many other substances and behaviors that people become addictive to. There are many more physical signs where someone in that person's life might notice and intervene. With gambling, we don't have that luxury, and people's addictions advance severely. This really interesting study was published that compared people with gambling addictions to people with other types of addictions, and found that people with gambling disorders had twice the rate of suicidal thoughts. The Nevada Council for Problem Gambling reports that about 50% of people reaching out for help have experienced suicidal ideation, and about 17% had attempted. So it's really important for adults to bring risk into that conversation. Above all, we encourage adults to listen without judgment. One of our most important messages is that this kind of thing is a non-taboo subject, and we can be safe adults for young people to come with questions and concerns about this behavior in their own lives or others. And we need to discuss those real risks. Talk about how these apps are designed to manipulate users. Talk about the kinds of experiences that people who develop gambling disorders might go through. Setting clear rules and expectation is also going to be really helpful. We don't find that permissiveness is a protective factor when it comes to young people and addictive behaviors. Knowing the consequences, following through, but also being clear that it's safe to reach out for help is really important. We always encourage our adults to be super mindful of modeling. And if adults that this young person is seeing are engaging in sports betting, you can always talk about the difference between adult and teen use. So an adult has a fully developed prefrontal cortex, and so you can make the argument that they're much less vulnerable to addiction. And we always stress that the number one thing young people can do to protect themselves from developing an addiction is delaying that age of first use. This is only a small glimpse of our content on gambling, gambling addictions, sports betting in the United States and internationally. If you're interested in getting in touch and partnering with us in prevention, feel free to scan the QR code on the screen or reach out to us at preventioned.org. Thanks for listening.